Okay, so since we have Greg back today, Greg used to go to, would be with us when we used to be at Colony. He's been away for a while, but now that he's retired, he'll be able to join us more often, right? So he wants to talk about the settings, because it's been a while since he's been here. Anything specific you want to talk about today?
Well, like we were just talking about the indoor shooting, indoor.
Uh-huh. Now, we've talked in the past about having a fast lens when it comes to circumstances where you need to shoot in low light conditions.
Right.
And you don't have access to a flash, or you can, for example, in the museum, you can't use flash, correct? It's against the regulations most of the time. So, in that case, it helps if you have a fast lens, something that opens up as wide as 2.8 or wider. I, for example, have a lens that opens up to 1.4 by 50 millimeter, on the 50. Of course, I probably would never shoot that wide anyway, but it's good to have if you ever need it. That just keeps you from having to raise your ISO all the way up really high. Because remember, the higher the ISO, the more grain you might collect. So you want to keep your ISO as low as possible. So therefore, having a fast lens really helps and comes in handy. However, if you don't have a fast lens, you can still achieve pretty good low light capture even with the kit lens, as long as you have your lens at 3.5. Remember, a kit lens is 3.5 to 5.6. What that means is that if your lens is a kit lens, you can't open up any wider than 3.5, and that's only if you're zoomed in. The minute you zoom out, the 3.5 lens becomes a 5.6. So you have to really keep in mind that if you're going to try to shoot at 3.5, you have to make sure that you stay zoomed in. A good way to do that is to actually tape your lens so that you don't move it. I've seen that done before. Because most of us will subconsciously try to zoom out right away to get closer to the action, right? But the minute you zoom out, that lens becomes 5.6, which means the lens gets darker. Remember that the higher the number, the darker the image is going to get. The lower the number, that it's going to let in more light, causing the image to go lighter. So you want to keep that image as light as possible if you're indoors or in low light conditions. In a gymnasium, in a museum, indoors, anywhere where you cannot use flash. So, as your photography evolves and you want to purchase a fast lens, well, that's the way to go. But obviously, if you're just a hobbyist or a travel photographer who doesn't really want to spend the money that a professional photographer has, then you're going to have to probably just do with what you have. Okay? In this case, your kit lens. And most cameras, when you purchase the body, will come with a kit lens or two. Sometimes you get a 55 to 80, I believe, or what is that? And then sometimes a 300, 70 to 300. But this kit lens right here that Greg has is an 18 to 55, and then you'll have usually an 18 to 55,
75.
and then you'll have a 75 to 300. This is your kit lens, okay? And this is good enough if you're outdoors in the middle of the day and there's plenty of light, you don't have any kind of issues. But that lens right there, you probably won't be able to use if you're shooting indoors, for example, like in a gymnasium, okay? It's just too dark. All right, unless you shoot your ISO really high. The cameras nowadays can handle ISOs pretty well, but still I suggest that if you can avoid using high ISOs, anything over 1600, maybe anything over 3200, you want to avoid that. Okay, I don't like to shoot any more than maybe about 1600 tops if I can avoid it. But some cameras now, for example, my camera can shoot up to 25,600 ISO. Of course, I would never shoot that high, right? But it's all about light. Remember, all photography revolves around light. Okay? The more light, the more shutter speed. The more light, the more that you're able to shoot handheld. Okay? If you want to shoot outdoors and it's the middle of the day and there's plenty of light, any lens is going to do, no problem. So, anything else? No, that's it for now. How about you?
I was listening on one of the radio shows. They were talking about wildlife, and they had a big. They said you could have like an 800 millimeter, one of those big ones, and still be handheld without a tripod.
Say the first part again?
Well, it was about wildlife, so.
Yeah, wildlife
So
photography, yes.
the guy had this big lens, he was saying, I think it was 800 millimeter, but he says those big lenses you could still hold handheld without a tripod.
Yes, as long as your shutter speed, it's gonna be higher. For example, if you're shooting at 800 millimeters, your shutter speed has to be over 800. Okay, most wildlife photographers will shoot with at least a 500 millimeter lens. Why? Because you don't want to get close to that bear, right?
Right.
You don't want to get close to that wildlife. So you'll see most wildlife photographers, and I know a couple of friends of mine who do wildlife, they shoot with 500 or 800 millimeter. But just remember, if you're going to be shooting handheld, you have to make sure that your shutter speed is equal or greater than your focal length. Now, a lot of wildlife photographers actually shoot with a tripod because it takes a lot of patience. You have to wait there for your prey, right? You have to wait there for your thing to come on. And it gets pretty tiresome holding on to that camera for a long period of time. So most wildlife photographers who know they have to wait for the wildlife to come through will be there on a tripod. In that case, it doesn't really matter that your shutter speed dropped below your focal length. Although, if you're shooting in the daytime, it doesn't really matter. You probably are going to be able to achieve it. For example, when I do my sports photography, I'm about 2,000 because I want to capture that fast motion. So as long as you're doing it during the daylight. Now, if you're doing like twilight, wildlife, like in the evening or whatever, then it's going to be a little bit harder. But yeah, 500. Most of them is 500, 800 millimeters is probably not as usual, but it does happen. But 500 is for wildlife, it seems to be about the most. The most usual one that people use. Yeah. So we're a little slow because we haven't been here in a while, so we don't really have a lesson plan for today. I wasn't sure if I was going to be here myself today. That's why I didn't really prepare it. How about you? Have any questions today? No, usually have.
Nothing jumping to mind. Yeah, we didn't have one last.
Yeah, no, we couldn't make it that one. Did you end up showing up?
I did show up.
Because everybody else I called, but I didn't have your number.
Oh, okay.
To let everybody else know.
We
You
still
don't
had to
have
come to
number?
the library.
I gave you my number. I shall give you my number.
Yeah, because I was able to contact everybody but you.
Oh, okay.
Even Clara, I don't know what she said today, but even Clara. Some of the girls that are married probably won't be here today because it's Valentine's Day. I gotta figure that. I know Laura, the two Lauras, Clara's not here today. She's usually my videographer over there. But anyway, so we're just gonna wing it today, guys. So everything's open to whatever you guys want to talk about. Normally, when we're over there, I don't want to go over all the settings. I don't have a chalkboard here like I do over there
Is that one right there?
to be able to write everything. Oh yeah, I guess I do, huh? That one will work, right? Do you guys feel like going through the same spiel again?
Want to do it again?
About the same spiel about the exposure triangle? Because you say you wanted to go about the settings, right?
Yeah.
I know these people have heard it a million times. Okay. Here we go. This will work, right? Can you see it?
I can see it.
Yeah.
Alright. So, what do you remember from when you used to go see us? Or what don't you remember? Okay, the last time you went shooting, what was it that you had trouble with, or a hard time with, or whatever?
Oh, it was, man, I was shooting inside, and it was fairly dark.
Uh-huh. And were you trying to shoot an auto, or were you trying to shoot a manual?
I was trying to shoot manual.
Uh-huh. And you weren't, were you getting dark images?
It was just too dark, yeah.
Yeah. And do you know what you were doing wrong?
Wasn't taking my time, and
How were you trying to shoot? You said manual mode, right?
yeah,
And so did you notice, did you happen to look at your meter and see that you were not properly exposed?
yes,
Yes.
but
You didn't know how to
I just couldn't get it.
go in the middle. Okay. Again, light, right?
Yeah.
Number one, either you had your aperture too closed, okay? Or you didn't have enough, or you could have had your aperture, your shutter speed too high. Remember, shutter speed also goes into play with the image being dark or light. If you have a really high shutter speed, the image goes dark, okay? So, trick, open up the aperture as wide as you can, lower your shutter speed low enough, but not too low that you can't hold it handheld. In other words, if that
So like if I take the picture and it goes,
yes, that's
So
what
they-
they call shutter drag.
right,
Okay, your shutter is dragging. That means your shutter speed is too low. It's all about shutter speed. So whenever you hit your shutter drag, that's telling you you don't have enough shutter speed for the shot. The only time that's going to be okay is if you're on a tripod. But if you're handheld, that's not going to work. Okay? So, I always say, people, the lowest aperture, I'm sorry, the lowest shutter speed that you should have when shooting handheld should be around 60. Now, the recommended shutter speed, the recommended factory shutter speed is 125, right? Remember 1 to 125 we always say? The one is silent, 1/25th of a second. Okay, that's the recommended shutter speed, correct? For handheld.
right.
Now, the minimum shutter speed that you should have to shoot handheld, and that's just really my opinion, through my experience, is that you can still get a pretty decent shot at 60, okay? Pretty much anything below 60 is going to require minimum, something like that. Anyway, minimum shutter speed should be 60, okay? But I still recommend either 80 or 125, all right? But just remember that it also has to be, oh my God, I keep getting this wrong. Minimum.
Can I ask you guys one question, just one question?
Yes.
I brought all my papers and everything, that's okay, I know, and I didn't get a number, you know,
All right.
to come into the taxes.
No, this is not taxi, that's next door.
Oh, what is this?
This is a photography class. But you're
Oh,
welcome to come to anyway.
okay, oh,
Okay, so, minimum, oh, I got it right. Anyway, but you still have to keep in mind your your focal length, okay? So if you're shooting at 70 millimeters, then your minimum shutter speed should be 70, okay? Just keep that in mind. Okay, now this is all shooting handheld, okay? Now, preferably to shoot, now remember your native settings for your camera are gonna be 125, 5.6 aperture, and an ISO of 400. These are the ones that come out of the factory. If you were to reset your camera to its factory specs, this is what you're gonna get, okay? And these are normally the ones that are gonna be now for handheld. Unless you got plenty of light, this isn't gonna work anyway. This is really, if you set your camera for flash mode, indoors, and you pop up your flash, this is what you wanna set it to, and you'll be able to get a good shot. However, the minute you close your flash, you're gonna look overexposed, you're gonna look dark, okay? Now, do me a favor, put your camera on manual mode. Hector, we're over here.
Okay.
All right. Set your camera on manual mode, put it to 5.6. I want you to do it so you know what's going on. They're doing taxes next door, so we have to see. Oh, okay.
Thank you.
They always do this for this time of the year. every year.
125.
125, 5.6, and then 400 ISO. Okay? So, night photography and flash photography are totally different because remember, with night photography, you're not utilizing flash. You're strictly on a tripod with low shutter speed. The difference between that and this is that with night photography, you're utilizing low shutter speed, where with flash photography, you're using regular shutter speed, like, 125 or whatever. You guys saw the photos we took over here, right? You saw them, right?
I believe so,
We
yes.
showed it to you guys, yeah. And, the one that you saw, let me go to my Facebook here. So,
So the next one's gonna be on the 28th?
I believe so, yeah.
yeah, the last day of the month. So if you look at these images here, this one for example here, right? If you remember, I shot this at 20 seconds, correct? Now we started when the cars were parked. I mean, the cars were stopped right here, right, at the red light. As soon as the red light switched to green, we opened up our shutter. So that's why you're seeing all the lights of the cars going, leaving the area. We talked about night photography. We talked about the best way to know if you captured a good shot is that when you see the lights all twinkling. Remember we talked about that? That's how you know when you see the starburst, is when you know that you've captured a good night photography. Okay, it is done strictly on a tripod. It is done usually done between 10 and 20 seconds of shutter speed, which totally requires you to use a tripod. If you try to take this image handheld, you're just gonna have a blurry mess.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, you're moving.
Yeah.
I don't care how steady you are, and I haven't had a beer in a week, so. So too much coffee or too much beer, one or the other.
So I was there, that was the grassy median of Euclid, and he's looking south with the band's shell at C and Euclid behind him. Yeah, that's a nice night.
Yeah, and you see a lot of cars that were actually stopped. And I had them say, okay, now open up your shutter once they start to take off. And as soon as the light changed, so the whole time that the shutter is open for 20 seconds, it's capturing the motion of cars going by. So that's multiple cars that are going by. And then even this other one, it's the same thing. This image where I'm focusing is nice and sharp, right? But you'll see the starburst everywhere else. That shows you that, and that's usually what's gonna happen. Anything that's not moving, it's gonna come out really sharp. You can actually get a sharper image in low. We always think, I'm gonna get a sharp image if I'm shooting with a really fast shutter speed, right? Because it freezes everything. Well, that's true. However, you can actually get a better, sharper image if you're using low shutter speed on an immovable subject. Okay. Now, you look at any images from the 1800s, you notice that nobody smiled, right? Nobody smiled. Why? Because they were required to sit still for 30 seconds. The shutter speed of the very first cameras back in the 1800s had a shutter speed of 30 seconds. So that is the reason that nobody smiled, because you had to stand perfectly still. If you look at an image that we're taking back in the cowboy days, you see a lot of blurring. Anybody that moved came out blurry. So only the ones that were sitting very, very still will be captured sharply.
They did something in the 18th century, which they don't do anymore. They would pose with dead people.
Oh yeah?
Yeah.
They would move.
They were fantastic subjects.
I bet. Yeah, that's funny. But it's true. It's true. It wasn't that he didn't want to smile, it's just because they couldn't. They couldn't move because they were told to stay perfectly still. Now you can kind of set your shutter to whatever you want it to be. But I'm saying, if you really want to get a really sharp image, just have somebody sit in front of you and say, don't move, don't breathe, just stay there. You'll get a really pretty image. And you'll see, even though it's nighttime, right, and it's dark, you'll see the sky kind of goes a little, it's actually pretty dark that day. But what happens is your shutter speed drops, it's letting in more light, right?
Yeah.
More light. So sometimes we'll take a picture of at night, and you'll say that, to you it looks really, really dark. But when you look at the image that you took at, let's say 20 or 30 seconds, you'll say that, wow, the sky looks bright, or it looks really, light, lit up. That's because the more shutter speed you let in, the more that the image is gonna brighten up.
What aperture you get to use on those?
I usually use my night photography at f8. You can go f11. Just remember, the more you close the aperture, the lower that your shutter speed is gonna be, cause it's getting less light.
Right.
Okay, as you close your aperture down, less light's coming into the sensor, that means your your shutter speed is also dropping. Let's say that I'm at f8, right? And I'm at 10 seconds. The minute I close my aperture down to f11, I might go to 20 seconds. If I go to f16, I might go to 30 seconds. Only because it's picking up less light, so the shutter speed's dropping. You can actually see it doing that.
And then your
What you wanna
manual
do-
also on the.
Your manual, what you wanna do is keep your ISO as low as possible as well. So let's say to get a good night photography, and we'll do that next time you want, while it's still dark. Set your aperture at a close aperture, like f8, f11, okay, maybe even f16 if you want, and then set a really low ISO, okay, whether it's no more than 200, but hopefully 100, okay? And then what you do is, because you're in manual mode, right? And then all you're gonna do is you're gonna keep dialing down your little wheel, and it's gonna keep moving your meter. Once it gets to the middle, now you're properly exposed. It means you can take your shot, correct? But what that means is that your shutter speed is probably gonna be really low. 10 seconds, 20 seconds, whatever. I was getting, it also depends on your camera, I was getting 10 seconds, but Laura, the lady that was here, she was getting 20 seconds. With the same aperture, the same ISO, it just depends on your sensor. Okay, my sensor is bigger, so it lets in more light. Her, she has a smaller camera, and her sensor's not as big. So it also depends on that as well, okay? So it's just a lot of little tricks that you learn. I never really used to be very much into this kind of stuff. I was always more into fast shutter speed, because I like shooting sports. That's my thing. You know, freezing action, baseball, football, that kind of a thing. Too bad I didn't get into photography earlier, because I would have probably tried to get into one of those sports kind of things, you know, because I really like that. And I had a career, and obviously had a job, so. And by the time I retired, I was a little too old to try to be out there trying to chase.